Good morning, everyone. This is Anthony Smith, lead economist here at FreightWaves, and we're about to get things underway here. Um, I am joined with our amazing co-host, Christine. She is also here at FreightWaves. She's with me. I believe you're all very familiar with her. Um, but I'm excited here to get started with some FreightWaves SONAR 301, looking at economic indices. Last time I was with you all, I think we went over a good deal of indicators, kind of showing how we can pull some of these combinations together and really glean some insights all together through all that. So just real quick, my background here. My name is Anthony Smith, as I mentioned. I'm lead economist here. My background is in economic consulting. I did that for many years, also housing construction as well. Looked at building products, national trends within that segment, help with forecasting, and really kind of where growth levels are, how to grow in down markets and a variety of industries. And really, as of late, been hanging out here at FreightWaves, enjoying every single moment. Um, but yes, as I mentioned, quick review of some of the things we went over last week. I know econ is everyone's favorite subject, so I'm sure you're just all so excited to get started. So without further ado, here we go. We're going to first uh, get into Sonar, our our tool for this evening. Um, Really quick, first thing, I know you all probably know this, but this trips up many people when you're in Sonar. A lot of times we land on this global page, right? And we start clicking around on the dashboard, the critical events, all that pretty stuff. And next thing you know, we want to create a chart. And then we see this blank, this plus sign, and we see this no arrow, and that stops us. This is a roadblock that gets many beginners and intermediate and sometimes advanced users like want to know what's going on with my sonar. Why can I create a chart? So let's go down to edit pages, add a page. Let's name this 18 because we can. We can name it whatever we want. We're going to name this 18. We add the page. From there, we should have a blank screen. And now this is ours to create with, and we can create a new chart here or heat map, watch list, whatever you want. So today we're going to start with a chart and a quick review over some of the things we went over last time and just kind of build off of some of those aspects. So um, first thing I think we went over last time was talking about GDP and more specifically, goods adjusted GDP. So what that means is, let's just type this in, GDP y dot USA. And so we can just type that in here. And what we see is the goods adjusted GDP. And so what this is telling us, or what this is showing us, is gross domestic product, as we all are familiar with, the sum of all things that are produced. The basket of goods in the USA is usually measured on a quarterly basis, but we have it out here with a year over year measurement. So we can kind of start to see that trend because as we remember last time, when we look at it overall, it's just going to keep climbing, 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 subtle dips every once in a while for a recession or a downturn, but it's overall going to keep expanding. And that's just what happens in a good economy like the US of A. So when we're looking at the real goods adjusted GDP year over year, we're looking at the growth trends on a year over year basis. And this is the goods side of the economy. So this is accounting for everything that gets hauled or transported on a truck. And so if you want a more specific definition, we always have our trusty knowledge center here. We can go down to the macroeconomic indicators. You know what? No, let's close this out. Let me show you how I got here. You can click, I believe it's this question mark here, click knowledge center, and then we can go indices by category, should pop up for you. And we can scroll on down and we can get into these macroeconomic indicators. So just quick refresher how I got here instead of just clicking around. So we have real gross domestic product, and we have, of course, our goods adjusted GDP. And so we're looking at our goods adjusted GDP. This is going to show, as I mentioned, all of the aspects that go into GDP that are not related to the goods and services aspects of it, because as we know, that does not move freight. And so when we're doing that, we can start to see the trends that can really impact freight. So let's do a compare chart. We're just clicking this compare icon here, and let's look at one of our tender rejection indices. Let's go with otri.usa, and we're going to make that our main symbol. And also let's do dual, so we can get a nice measurement on this. And on top of that, let's also go with large fonts just to make that a little bit easier to see, make it look a little bit better. And let's go 1 year. And so let's zoom it out a little bit more. We can see when we're looking at the 1 year or a little bit further back, as rejections get lower, we see also a decline in the goods adjusted GDP. So one of the things that we heard earlier on in the years was how much GDP grew, right? And so we see that outstanding growth in GDP, but we didn't quite see that same growth in the beginning of the year and throughout the year for freight. And so when we see that growth in GDP, we see a lot of growth on the services side, and not so much with manufacturing as of late, not so much with some of the goods sides of the economy. And so that can really start to drag on the freight economy as a whole. Very touted freight recession earlier on this year. So that can really be the disconnect there. So when you hear GDP grew by X amount, but you're not quite seeing it on the freight market, this is something to consider, is that GDP growth largely has to do with services side. So moving forward, one of the other things we went over was construction spending, right? So looking at housing starts, construction spending, all these are nice gauges in the macroeconomy. What's the consumer doing? Are they buying homes? When they're buying homes, they're filling them up with stuff that needs to get transported, hauled all across the country. Doesn't just stop at the building products, but construction spending, COSP.RES. So that's going to be construction spending for residential. And we can just click on that, see what, and so we're looking at residential. So we have total construction spending in here outside of residential, but residential is by far the largest component of all the measurements that we have for construction spending. And as many of you know, construction spending, a lot of it's lumber, building products that get hauled on flatbed. So we have a FOTRI.USA. We have a flatbed tender rejection barometer. So we can set this as our main, set this off to a year, and then we can kind of see that relationship, right? We can see the dips and construction spending for residential construction spending. We can also see the dips and rises, the peaks and troughs for flatbed outbound tender rejection as well. Now, because construction spending is a monthly measurement, we see a little bit more of a smoother line, a little bit more of a jagged line, because that can be a little bit more volatile for the flatbed outbound tender rejection. So what we can do is throw a study on there. Yes, a study. Since it's on a day-to-day basis, I like to use the moving average. Let's go 30 periods. So that red line is going to pop up and it's going to smooth things out a little bit more. So yeah, pro tip, don't forget about the studies, moving average. Be able to throw that in there, really smooth out the trends. So you can see what the underlying trend is, and not just a one-off day or one-off week rise or drop. So yes, looking at construction spending, yeah, it's important because the consumer drives the economy. I think as many of you already know, when we're talking about GDP, about 70% of that is going to come from consumer spending. So we're looking at consumer expenditures, and so I think it's right around 68%, so almost 70%. And so all of that's really going to come down to how the consumer is feeling and the conditions for the consumer, right? So one of the things that we didn't quite touch on last time was some of the consumer side of things. And so I know we went over home purchasing sentiment index from the Fannie Mae, and that's really a good measurement for some of the consumer sentiment and how they feel about buying a house. But also, as I mentioned, I think last time, it has carryover effects, right? So when a consumer is feeling confident about buying a house, even if they aren't able to because there's supply side issues, maybe housing starts, as I think we all just saw this morning. If you're listening to this morning, we just saw the latest housing starts numbers declined on a month-to-month basis, which I don't think was too surprising since they skyrocketed last month. But needless to say, there is some supply side issues on housing segments in the housing segment. Um, Builders really struggling to find adequate labor when this tight labor market, available lots, and that's really starting to drive up prices. And this goes for existing homes as well, limited availability. So that's really starting to drive up prices on entry level homes and mid level as well. And so really diminishing the amount of homes that are available to purchase. So that's one of the things to take into account when we're looking at the home purchasing sentiment index. And when we see those headline numbers on housing starts, there's demand there. You know what? Let's pull up the HPSI.USA. Pull it up here. We can see it's relatively high. We just hit a peak, I think. That was the August measure. So that was the highest in the survey's recording. So we had a little bit of a slight downtick in the September number, but still strong overall. We're looking at the grand scheme of things. So one of the big things to take note when we're looking at consumer confidence. Another aspect. So when we're looking at consumer confidence, I think one of the biggest things that we are seeing that might be weighing on the consumer are headline items regarding slower global growth, things like that, trade war. We see things about Brexit all the time. So these things pop into the minds of the consumer. So we know we also see headlines items that employment is staying resilient. We're seeing things that spending is still staying pretty strong-ish. So I will pull up some, I think some some um, consumer spending numbers here shortly, some retail spending numbers here if we have a little bit of time at the end. But all those conditions can be good for consumer. Wages, employment can be good, but it means nothing if they're not feeling confident. So um, we have, besides the home purchasing sentiment index, we have this awesome group of indicators in SONAR that goes off of digital momentum. I believe we have digital momentum uh, here in the knowledge center. Yes, we have digital momentum signals. So we just click on that. So what it is, it's a value between 0 and 100, and that's an indication of increasing interest in a company or subject based on metadata. So that's telling us where traffic is going, right? So what we see in the metadata is usually they're measuring is from peer data, Wikipedia, Twitter activity, web page activity, and YouTube. So when people are particularly interested in a certain topic, that drives up the metadata. And so it's a value between 0 and 100. 100 meaning this is the absolute most activity that we've seen in that particular set of data or that subject. So why am I talking about this? Because I'll show you why. Let's build out a new chart here. Let's do, Christine, what should we do? Let's do a tree map. Let's do a tree map. All right, and we're gonna drag this over. Let's see, DMs. Let's look at index categories, digital momentum signals. So let's look at some digital momentum signals. Let's look at topics, right? So we can just add this over here, and I think we're done. I think we're done. We have them added, save, and we can look at digital momentum as soon as this loads up here. I think it's loading. Did I not click? I didn't click. Sorry about that, everyone. I click now. I promise. I think it's loading up. Indices. Yes. Am I frozen? No. Indices should work. Sorry about this, everyone. Thankfully, I believe I have. Let's see. Oh, this is the problem, everyone. I already have DM saved here. So when it populates, this is what it will look like. My apologies, everyone. Can't have two DMs. One DM at a time. What a time to be alive. So we have Brexit issues here. So we have our tree map, top left showing the largest, most significant changes in numbers. And as you go down to the bottom right, it gets smaller and smaller. So lower volume, lower significance. So when we're looking at the top left here, we're looking at what are really the core items, right? The most significant volume, the biggest changes, the most volatility, and respects to the total number. So we have Brexit issues, something that's on a lot of people's minds. And so that doesn't just end with the US consumer, but global, right? So we're looking at global confidence levels because we're looking at the overall economy. It's not just the US economy, but global recessions fear. So we also have a digital momentum signal for global recessions. Let's clean this up a little bit year to date, or even a 6 month. It's a lot of volume out here. 3 months. And so when we're looking at that, we see that there has been a lot of volume for Brexit issues. There has been a lot of volume for global recession fears, a lot of increased activity. So this is something that's on consumers' minds, right? So when we're looking at the overall consumer sentiment, looking at digital momentum signals can be a good start when we're seeing what are some topics that are on the minds of people like you and me, everyday Americans, just what's going on, and really on a global scale as well. So we can see what's being talked about or what's being searched. It's not telling us what the sentiment is on that, but it can be revealing when we see a lot of questions around that particular topic. We also have these for public companies, so you can see what within the industry is really gathering momentum on a digital level. So with that, I think is a good transition for looking at, let's get back to our 18 page, looking at when we're looking at retail sales. And so when we're looking at retail sales, I will pull this up here outside of our, let's see, retail sales, something that just got released not long ago. Bit of a headline item as of late, just because when we looked at retail sales, we saw that there was a, let's first get it in here before I start talking about it, right? RESLG.USA, retail sales year over year. When we're looking at retail sales, we saw that there was a bit of a drop for retail sales in the most recent month of data. And so we see that that recent drop still well above year ago levels, that it's concerning, right? So it's concerning because when we're looking at consumer spending and overall the overall sentiment for the economy, there's a lot of headline items, right? Trade wars going on with China, what's going on that front. Is that going to start to have an impact on increasing consumer prices? And what's that going to do going into the busy holiday season? So we're looking at retail sales. It's something that we're watching closely to see what the thermometer, the gauge for the consumer is. And so we saw in the most recent month, we see that the largest monthly decline since February 2019. So without all of the volatile segments like building materials, motor vehicles, food services, things like that, there was a 0.3% increase for retail sales. So that's essentially the same as August. But when we're looking at overall retail sales, largest drop since February 2019. And so this is something to take note of, because we're heading into a critical consumer spending season in the year. When we're looking at the year end, we're looking at peak retail season. So this is something that we're going to keep an eye on because that's going to have implications to freight movement. And Christine, I think we have something to gauge freight movement, right? We have outbound tender volume index, OTVI.USA. So let's pull that up. And so let's set that as our main. Did you guys know that we can switch our symbols? So we can just click set this as our main symbol. Some of you old school users for Sonar know that that wasn't always a thing. It's a thing now. I'm glad it's here. But when we're looking at in the green line, retail sales for year over year, it's not a direct correlation, but it certainly contributes to the volume, right? When we're looking at the volume of freight being hauled throughout the country. And so when we're looking at increasing year over year growth for retail sales for those goods being purchased, things like um, electronics, furniture, just talking about housing starts, that home purchasing sentiment index. When you're feeling good about buying a house, you buy other stuff, right? Retail sales of sofas go up, furniture. We actually have that in. I think we spoke about that last time. We can even pull it up here again. RESL.SOFA. We can pull that up. So in that orange line, we have retail sales of all these be monitoring closely as we get into the peak retail season, because it's going to be crucial not only for our GDP number, consumer expenditures and things like that, but it's also going to be critical for volume of freight moving around when we're looking at the grand scheme of things. Um, Also, another headline item was the PMI, the Purchasing Managers Index. I think that dropped below 50 for a consecutive month. ISM dot PMI. That was one of the subjects that we spoke about last time. The PMI dropped in September to 47.8. We have that in here now. And that's critical, right? So we're talking about confidence, outlook. This is confidence outlook on a manufacturing side. So those of you not familiar with this measure, just real quick, 50 under is based around the number 50. It's the diffusion index. Anything above 50 is showing us that there's indicative of growth. They have the expectations of expansion in the industry. Anything below 50 is a signal of contraction. So when we're looking at that 50 number, it's really a barometer. It's based around that number. So anything below 50, 47.8, not good. So as I mentioned, this is the second month of decline. Additionally, this is also, I believe, that the lowest number in well over a decade. So we're going back to '08 levels, right? Not the best year. We're looking at overall economic output. So this is going to present somewhat of a threat to um, when we're looking at freight activity in the manufacturing segment, when we're looking at hauling manufactured goods and things like that throughout the country. This is going to present some problems when we're looking at that. So what we can do, this is a forward-looking indicator. So it's going to be a little bit more forward-telling than when we would see the industrial production number, which I believe just declined this morning. This is telling us what's going to a little bit earlier on, because that number is on a month-to-month basis as well, but it's more of a confirmation number. So we're looking at the Institute of for Manufacturing Supply Management, I'm sorry, PMI. We can do some comparisons with our otri.usa. Set that as our main symbol here. And let's do year to date. And so we can see, sorry about that, folks. We can see when there's a general decline and the manufacturing outlook, there's going to be a decline in some of the tender rejections as well. So those of you who know, electronically tendered loads the rejections are rejected less and less because capacity might be loose. And so you can't be as choosy as some of the loads that you accept. And so when you have options, you don't have to take the first thing that comes your way, and you can get a little bit more selective with your loads and, demand a higher rate. Usually spot rates rise with those as well. So when we're seeing a decline in the manufacturing segment, that has implications for the freight market as well, especially when we're looking at tender rejection index and spot rates and contract rates and things like that. So this all ties together. Lastly, lastly, we're running close here. I know we just begun. But we only have a few minutes left. And I can't wait to talk to you all again next time. But I need you to have a little cliffhanger. We all familiar with the PMI, the Purchasing Managers Index, right? But how many of you are familiar with the LMI, the Logistics Managers Index, right? We have it broken down in many different measurements here. We have a composite measure. So this is similar to the PMI, except it looks at specifically the logistics managers side, the logistics side of things. This is also it's a combination of 8 unique components. It's a collaboration of sorts with Colorado State, Arizona State, I believe Maryland, Rochester Technical Institute. There's a few others. Sorry, those I'm forgetting. But what I'm saying is that we're going to dive deep into this as well next Econ 301. So be sure to tune in for that. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Anthony Smith and lead economist here. Feel free to reach out with any kind of econ questions here at FreightWaves. You can reach me at asmith@freightwaves.com. Again, that is asmith@freightwaves.com. Thank you so much. Oh, can't wait to talk to you soon. Feel free to email, call, whatever, anything. We'll chat with you soon. Bye-bye.